The sound of the front door closing sent a jolt through me. My heart raced as I wiped my damp palms on my jeans. He was home. I glanced at the clock. 7:15 p.m. sharp, like always. But tonight the air seemed heavier, the silence sharper. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like static. He walked in with that unfamiliar glint in his eyes, the kind that made my stomach knot. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Dinner's ready." He gave a tight nod, sat down at the table, and dug in. I watched the tension in his jaw, the distracted way he ate. The man I married had always been lighthearted, cracking jokes even on bad days. Now, his silence filled the room like fog. Halfway through the meal, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said without looking at me. "We need to try something new." "Like what?" My mind jumped to weekend getaways or salsa classes. He leaned back, eyes finally meeting mine. "I've arranged for us to have some company, 2 guys, this weekend." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the plate. My pulse roared in my ears. "What do you mean?" My voice cracked. "It'll spice things up," he said flatly. "Keep things interesting." I felt the room tilt. I won't," I whispered. He shrugged and stood up, tossing his napkin on the table. "It's happening," he said over his shoulder as he left the room. I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, the weight of his words pressing down on me. My mind raced with questions. How did we get here? Why was he doing this? The man I once trusted, the life we once cherished. Everything felt like a lie. I wanted to run. But where would I go? My name was on this mortgage. My memories were tied to these walls, and part of me still believed, hoped, that maybe, just maybe, I could fix what was broken. I had no idea how wrong I was. The days after that conversation felt like living in a fog. I moved through my routines mechanically. Work, groceries, cleaning, while my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. Every glance at him sent a shiver down my spine. He acted as though nothing had happened, sitting on the couch watching TV or scrolling on his phone. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. I confided in a coworker during lunch, careful with my words. "Sometimes," I said, swirling my coffee, "people change so much you wonder if you ever knew them." She nodded sympathetically. "Relationships are hard," she said, as if that explained everything. That night, I lay in bed wide awake while he snored beside me. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding. The thought of 2 strangers coming into my home made my skin crawl. I wanted to believe it was a sick joke, but his calm, matter-of-fact tone haunted me. By Friday afternoon, dread settled in my chest like concrete. I thought about running, packing a bag and driving away. But where? My family lived across the country, and I hadn't spoken to my best friend in months. I had nowhere to go. And then, as if reading my thoughts, he texted me. "Remember, tomorrow at 8. Don't make this hard." My hands trembled as I locked my phone. Saturday arrived with an eerie stillness. I spent the day cleaning, rearranging furniture, anything to distract myself. The clock ticked relentlessly toward 8 p.m. At 7:45, he called me into the living room. "Let's just get through tonight," he said, voice low. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The doorbell rang, sharp and unforgiving. My heart raced as I opened the door. 2 men stood there, tall, confident, strangers who didn't belong in my world. They stepped inside with practiced ease. My husband shook their hands and motioned to the couch. I perched on the edge of the armchair, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. The men talked about sports, work, travel. My mind spiraled. And then it happened. He reached for my hand and gave it a light squeeze. "We're doing this," he murmured. My chest tightened as the realization hit me. My thoughts screamed at me to run, to scream. But I stayed seated, frozen in place. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next, there would be no coming back from it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. My palms were slick, my breathing shallow. The two men sat on the couch, exchanging casual remarks with my husband while I sat stiffly across from them, every nerve in my body on high alert. The air felt thick, almost unbreathable. I tried to focus on their words, something about a football game, but the sound blurred into static. One of the men glanced at me with a polite smile. I forced myself to nod, to appear composed, but my muscles refused to cooperate. My husband noticed my discomfort and placed his hand on my shoulder, the pressure firm. "Relax," he whispered. The word felt like an order, not reassurance. Time dragged on until my husband stood and walked to the kitchen. The men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. I stared at the floor, wishing it would swallow me whole. The man closest to me spoke. "We can leave if you'd feel more at ease," he said gently. The unexpected empathy caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, but my husband's voice cut through the tension. "Everything's fine," he said, reappearing with a tray of drinks. His forced cheeriness sent a chill down my spine. He handed me a glass. My fingers trembled as I took a sip, the cold liquid barely registering. The man beside me shifted closer. I turned away instinctively. The room felt smaller, suffocating. My heart raced as my husband settled next to me, his knee pressing against mine. He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. "You said you'd consider it," he said softly. I hadn't promised anything, but the weight of his expectation was suffocating. The other man stood, adjusting his jacket. "Maybe we should go," he suggested, his tone uncertain. My husband shot him a sharp look. "Stay," he said. The tension crackled like static electricity. Suddenly, one of them moved to the window, looking out as if searching for an escape of his own. I followed his gaze, my pulse quickening. The clock ticked louder. The room swayed. My breathing grew ragged. At that moment, I stood abruptly. The men froze. My husband's hand brushed my wrist as if hesitating. "Don't," he said. My heart hammered as I yanked free. I didn't look at him. I didn't care. I reached the door in 3 strides, my fingers fumbling with the lock. The night air hit me like a slap. I stumbled down the steps and into the street. Behind me, the door opened and closed. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the dim glow of a streetlight, gasping for breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I stood there, bent over, hands on my knees, feeling the world tilt beneath me. And then it happened. A tearful gasp that turned into a choking sob. The reality hit me. I was alone, truly alone, with nowhere to go and no idea what came next. The cold night air stung my face as I stood beneath the dim streetlight, my chest heaving. My mind raced through every possible option. Go back? Never. Call someone? But who? My hand trembled as I unlocked my phone. The first name that came to mind was an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I hit the call button. "Hello?" She answered groggily. "It's me," I said, voice shaky. I need help." 10 minutes later, I sat in her living room, wrapped in a blanket. The warmth did little to ease the icy dread in my veins. She handed me tea and asked no questions, just listened. I tried to explain, but the words felt surreal even as I said them aloud. "I thought I knew him," I whispered, "but I don't." "Sometimes," she said softly, "we don't see the cracks until it's too late." The hours blurred together until sunlight peeked through the blinds. I felt numb, disconnected from reality. My phone buzzed repeatedly with his name flashing across the screen. I turned it face down. Later that afternoon, my friend suggested we take a walk to clear my head. We wandered through the quiet streets, our breath visible in the crisp air. The motion helped, if only slightly. We stopped at a park bench, and as I sat down, the weight of everything hit me again. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just know I can't go back." She squeezed my hand, and we sat in silence, the gravity of that decision settling between us. I thought about the life I'd tried to build, the man I'd once trusted, and the strangers who had crossed my path. How had it all unraveled so quickly? That evening, I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, paying in cash. The room smelled faintly of bleach, and the curtains didn't quite close all the way. I sat on the bed, scrolling through messages I didn't want to read. His words shifted from pleading to angry to apologetic, a chaotic spiral of desperation. I powered off the phone and let it drop to the floor. Exhaustion finally pulled me under, but sleep brought no relief. My dreams twisted into scenes of unfamiliar faces, tense conversations, and the suffocating weight of regret. I woke hours later, disoriented and drenched in sweat. The clock glowed 3:47 a.m. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and tried to ground myself in the present. The motel room, the faded carpet, the distant hum of traffic. They were real. My life as I'd known it wasn't. A hollow ache settled in my chest. I stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room, barely recognizing the person who looked back. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against the cool glass. "We made it through," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I meant by we. For the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly alone. The morning sun streamed through the thin motel curtains, painting the room in muted gold. I sat on the edge of the bed, the ache in my chest a dull companion. My phone lay on the nightstand, dark and silent. I reached for it, thumb hovering over the power button. Did I really want to face whatever messages awaited me? I pressed it anyway. The screen lit up with missed calls and texts. The last message stood out. "Come home. Let's talk." My chest tightened. For months, I'd begged for conversations, understanding anything. And now, when everything was broken beyond repair, he wanted to talk. I dressed quickly, grabbed my bag, and checked out of the motel. The receptionist barely looked up as I left, the door creaking shut behind me. The cold air hit me like a wave of clarity. My feet carried me to a diner down the street. The bell above the door jingled, and I slid into a corner booth. I needed time to think. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a kind smile, poured coffee without asking. "Rough night?" she asked. I gave a tight nod. "Honey," she said, "if you're here, it means you made it through." Her words, simple yet profound, hit me harder than I expected. I sat there long after my coffee turned cold. Memories flooded my mind. Laughter on road trips, quiet evenings on the couch, the first time we painted the kitchen and left streaks on the ceiling. And then came the darker moments. His cold stares, the dismissive remarks, that last night. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "I'm waiting." My stomach flipped. I stood, left a generous tip, and walked out into the crisp morning. My steps felt lighter with each passing block. I passed familiar streets, old storefronts, and finally, my own neighborhood. The house appeared in the distance. Our house. My heart raced as I reached the driveway. His car sat there, just like always. I hesitated before opening the door. Inside, the living room was neat, almost staged. He stood by the window, watching me. "You came back," he said, voice soft. "I needed answers," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I thought it would help us. I thought you'd go along with it." I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. "You broke us," I said, each word deliberate. "And you didn't even see it." Silence stretched between us. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "What now?" he asked. I didn't answer. My hand gripped the doorknob, and I glanced back. The man I once knew was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized. I opened the door and stepped into the sunlight. The warmth on my skin felt like freedom. As I walked away, a sense of peace settled in my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was certain of one thing. I was done living someone else's idea of happiness. Behind me, the door slammed shut, the echo sharp and final. I smiled faintly. Sometimes endings weren't tragic, they were necessary.